Mr. Sanjay Chadha, Mr. Nishad Parekh, Dr. An Chun Yung, Ambassador Dr. V.S. Sheshadri, Dr. Park Jin, Madam Rita Teotia, Ladies and gentlemen, please take your places. Please take your places. The Honorable Minister is on the dais. We'd like to request all the others to please come up. We'd like to begin this session. We are already 10 minutes behind schedule. Mr. Sanjay Chadha, may I request you to please come up? Ladies and gentlemen, please come back in and take your places. Please come back to your seats. Please take your places. Mr. Sanjay Chadha, Joint Secretary, Department of Commerce, Dr. Ambassador V.S. Sheshadri, Mr. Nishad Parekh, may I request you all to please come up. Ladies and gentlemen, please settle down. We're about to begin this next session. India-Korea CEPA, a solid partnership, way to go. Please come in and take your seats. please bring the computer to the dais for the presentation. Please bring the computer. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin this session with Mr. Sanjay Chadha, Joint Secretary, Department of Commerce and Chief Negotiator for the India-Korea CEPA. I'd like to invite him to give an inaugural presentation on Indo-Korea CEPA. Please settle down, take a seat. And please welcome Mr. Sanjay Chadha.
Honorable Minister for State for Commerce, Mr. C.R. Chaudhary, Ms. Rita Tewatia, Union Commerce Secretary, dignitaries on the dais, and distinguished guests. I'll just run through a few slides to provide an overview on what happened, what is the historical perspective on the Indo-Korea CEPA, and where it's going from now on. As some of you would be aware, the Indo-Korea CEPA, after intense negotiations, was signed in August 2009 and came into effect from 1st January 2010. Now for us, it was a CEPA with the first OECD country. And we had aspirations in textiles, leather, SME goods, pharmaceutical, tourism, healthcare, and IT services. Similarly, Korea had aspirations on automobiles, shipbuilding, steel, synergies, energy, and engineering products. Now, there were a lot of complementarities which were identified on both sides, which were thought would get harnessed with this CEPA. But over the 5-year period that we did an analysis, we find that the utilization rate of the CEPA, that is how much of the preferential tariff was availed on each side, remains relatively low. It is low both for Korea and for India. If you look at the goods exchange between the two countries, if you see the 5 years preceding the CEPA, that is in 2005 to 2010 period, both our exports and imports almost grew 2.5 times. That was the time when it was thought that these synergies can be harnessed, and there is a lot of potential for this to grow further with the adoption of the CEPA. However, as you can see, the period after the CEPA, which has been expanded also, the Indian imports from Korea grew marginally and became stable at around $12 billion US. But the exports from India to Korea started coming down. Now we are aware that there were a lot of macroeconomic factors responsible for this. There was a global recession. But what became of concern was that the trade deficit, which was of the order of $5 billion, rose to become $8 billion. Now, if we look at some of the lines that are traded, Korea has a 10-digit HS code, and we have an 8-digit HS code. The HS code is the code which determines how to classify that commodity. If we see the concentration of trade, top 50 lines at 10-digit level constitute 68% of India's exports to Korea. If we take the top 100 lines, it is almost 79%, and top 150 lines are 83% of India's exports to Korea. So it's a very highly concentrated trade basket. On the Korea's exports to India, the top 50 lines are about 52%, constituting 6.8 billion in 2016. Again, top 100 lines are 66%, and top 150 lines are 74%. Now, if we measure this through what is known as Herfindahl index, or HH index as it's popularly called, the lower the value of the index, the more diversified the export basket. As you can see, when in 2004, India's exports to Korea were more diversified. But over a period of time, they have become more concentrated, as can be seen from the red lines in the graph. And Korea's exports to India have become more diversified, as can be seen from the blue lines. Now, what was the potential that we sought to harness, and how much of it has been harnessed? Korea is a major food, agriculture, and marine product importing country. But even now, out of a total of 21,000 billion imports of food and food products into Korea, India has a very modest, sorry, the figures are in million, I'm very sorry, billion is right. 21 billion imports of food in Korea. India's exports are only 379 million. It constitutes only 1.8% of the total food imports into Korea. This, despite there being complementarities in soya, in sesame, in shrimps, and in a lot of marine products. Similarly, if you look at the services trade, India's global services exports has been growing, and so has India's services exports to Korea. But the share of services exports has grown, and the percentage of India's exports to Korea and the total export basket has also grown. Now, this is a healthy sign, but yet there is a significant potential for higher growth. As the Prime Minister had himself mentioned, one of the areas identified was Korea's prowess in hardware and in computers and manufacturing, electronics, and India's known ability in software, India's global recognition of the software prowess that it has. But these complementarities are yet to be harnessed. There haven't been much of matchmaking, though embedded technologies have been growing, and a lot of such technologies have been growing where there exists a scope for such partnerships. If you look at the investment trends, again, in absolute terms, the investments from Korea into India have been growing, as you can see from the slide. But Korea's share in the total FDI flows in India still remains very modest and less than 1%. We do believe that there is a lot of scope for this. A lot of Korean companies are household names here. If you see white goods, I don't think there'd be very many households who have refrigerators, TVs, washing machines, and microwaves who do not have a LG or a Samsung product in their house. There have been a lot of facilitation of Korean investments. As the PM had also mentioned, Korea Plus was launched. This was an initiative which has been given only for the second time to a country. We have a Japan Plus, which was to facilitate Japanese investment, and we have a Korea Plus for the Korean investment. Also, we have signed a double taxation avoidance agreement in May 2015. We have Invest India, which was a special purpose vehicle launched. We have Korean industrial parks coming up in Rajasthan, and there is a lot of scope for such Korean industrial parks to come up. Now, let us just look at the few challenges which are there in the CEPA. Number one, I told you, of concern is the widening trade imbalance. We believe that this is an area where if both the sides work and there is more equitable trade, then it will be sustainable in the long run. A lot of these are not necessarily due to tariff barriers, but due to a lot of non-tariff barriers. There is also a little bit of a gap in expectation on both sides. The CEPA is a comprehensive agreement. It's not just a free trade agreement on goods. it has a lot of other angles to it. Also of concern is the low utilization rate. A lot of concessions, almost 70% of the items, India has given zero duty to Korea. Korea has given 80%. Yet, these do not translate into a reality. And we look at the reasons why they don't. And these are the areas that we need to address so that industry on both the sides can take advantage of the intended benefits. As I mentioned, we have to improve market access. We have to expand the scope of services. We have to ensure that the SPS and other TBT and such other non-tariff barriers are addressed so that both the sides can actually take advantage of the intended benefits which have been provided for under the CEPA. If you look at the comparison between FTAs, Korean FTAs with emerging economies, and similarly compare it with India's FTA with Japan, we see that a lot of non-tariff barriers which exist under the Indo-Korea CEPA, and if eased, can provide a big boost to our trade. Now, these are a few of the areas which are for future cooperation, which were discussed with the Korean side also. We need more B2B contacts. We have to build on mutual cooperation. We need business-specific activities. We need more seminars like this one. We need regulatory agreements. We have under the CEPA provision for mutual recognition agreements in professional services, in testing standards. We need to get these operational. We also have to look at elimination of non-tariff barriers, mutual cooperation in SPS compliance. And as I mentioned, that the complementarities to be harnessed need specific issues to be addressed. Like one example is that there is an Indian English program in Korea which enables English teachers to come to Korea to teach English. The requirement is that you have to be a native English-speaking country. Now, India, though it has probably the highest number of English teachers of good quality, is not able to avail of this program. So there are such examples where both the sides need to have a look and need to work together. In the last meeting, there was a decision that we should work together for a joint future strategy group. Now, this future strategy group will comprise of not just the governments, but the businesses from both the sides, the academia, the IITs. And the idea is that we should take up new technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, future manufacturing, robotics, and basically the Industrial Revolution 4.0 can be driven if we decide to pool in our resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chadha. I'd now like to invite Mr. Nishad Parekh from CII to give us the Indian perspective on CEPA and the future expectations.
Honorable Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, Government of India, Shri C.R. Chowdhury. Ms. Rita Thiotia, Secretary, Department of Commerce, Government of India. Dr. A.H.N. Chung-Yong, former Chairman of Korea Commission for Corporate Partnership. Ambassador Dr. V.S. Seshadri, Senior Advisor, CII. Dr. Park Jin, President, Asia Future Institute. Mr. Sanjay Chadha, Joint Secretary, Department of Commerce. Friends and colleagues from India, Indian and Korean industry. Senior government officials from India and Korea, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. The world trading system has witnessed an increasing number of regional and bilateral trade integration initiatives in recent times. India is no exception to this trend, as at present it is party to 13 FTAs and is negotiating 7 more, including the RCEP and FTA negotiation with EU. Korea was amongst the first few countries with whom India opted to sign the FTA. India signed the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, CEPA, with Republic of Korea in August 2009. The agreement, after over 3 years of negotiations, came into effect on 1st January 2010. It is an agreement between two countries at different stages of development. For India, it was a first case of signing free trade agreement with an OECD country. Korea, on one hand, exhibited a successful example of export-led industrial growth by creating a strong manufacturing base. India, on other, is a fast-developing emerging economy with a large domestic market, but whose external trade performance has not been outstanding in comparison to other developing economies. It has been 8 years since the CEPA came into effect. It is quite understandable to examine its impact, particularly on bilateral trade, both in goods and services. The bilateral trade in goods was US $11.9 billion in 2009-10, the year in which CEPA was signed. It has increased to US $16.9 billion in 2016-17. It is just an increase of US $5 billion of trade post-CEPA implementation. It is imperative to review the FTA for a win-win trade agreement aligning with spirit of bilateralism. If we analyze the impact of India's perspective, the figures do not indicate an encouraging outcome. India's merchandise export to Korea increased from US $3.4 billion in 2009-10 to US $4.2 billion in 2016-17, an increase of less than US $1 billion in 8 years. As a result, India's merchandise deficit with Korea shot up steeply to US $8.3 billion in 2016-17 from US $5.5 billion in 2009-10. This made Indian industry skeptical about the gains accruing to India after India-Korea CEPA. Therefore, we need to make an objective assessment as to what extent domestic factors such as infrastructure bottlenecks, business environment, cost of capital contributed to this adverse impact, in addition to change in tariff structure post-CEPA. We also need to assess the reciprocation and the effect of third country, particularly China, FTA, on bilateral trade impact with partner countries. Let me now briefly touch upon the services and investment component of India-Korea CEPA. India's aim has been to leverage its strength in services trade to offset potential losses in goods trade, increase market access for its service providers through relaxation of regulatory barriers and on entry and operations, enable regulatory harmonization and cooperation, facilitate investments in services inward and outward. Analysis of the commitments indicates improved coverage and depth of concessions under FTA by both sides compared to that under the GATS, but still restrictions remain on key modes and sectors of interest. The success in service sector also depends upon ability to achieve regulatory harmonization, which I understand not much progress has been made. Senior representatives from government could throw more lights on it. Finally, on investment, South Korea features among the leading source countries of FDI from 2008-9 onwards, but difficult to attribute it completely to CEPA. Macroeconomic factors appear to be driving FDI flows with most partners. Failure to attract a growing share of FDI in manufacturing from these countries is indicative of the various constraints affecting India's manufacturing sector and doing business in India. However, in the recent years, Make in India, a concerted effort has been made to improve the business climate and facilitate FDI into the country. India has significantly improved its ranking in World Bank's Doing Business report. We are very optimistic to attract more investment from Korean companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parikh. Our next speaker is Dr. Chung Yong, former chairman of the Korea Commission for Corporate Partnership.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Above all, Korea currently perceives India as the most preferred destination in the post-China era. India's 7% of the growth with the most populous but youngest demography, as Prime Minister Modi indicated this morning, among major economies, envy of all in the world, including South Koreans. Many global entrepreneurs and thought leaders project for India to attain the $10 trillion economy by 2030. Korea this year is expected to cross the benchmark of the $30,000 per capita GDP, with the trade volume of $1 trillion several years in a row. But Korea is now searching for a new effective partner to diversify its foreign economic linkages other than traditional big markets such as China and the United States. We believe that we cannot put excessively all of our eggs into a few markets. Roughly 25% of the Korea's export used to go to China's market, and almost 40 to 50% of the Korea's outbound foreign direct investment landed in China. The U.S. protectionism is another great challenge for Korea. In terms of the development stage and factor endowment, Korea and India are perfectly complementing each other. It is really good time for us to assess the full impact of the CEPA, as this session addressed. This year, the CEPA enters its 9th year of effectuation, reaching almost 10 years, long enough to move even the mountains and rivers, according to Korea's traditional adage. Despite the bilateral CEPA effectuation with great expectation at the beginning, bilateral trade growth between two countries is down from 30% before the CEPA years to a mere 3% in the recent post-CEPA years. The trade target, which was expected to cross $40 billion a year by 2015, is stuck at $18 billion. So I would like to say the CEPA, despite its great promise, proves to be a dysfunctional and very marginal, needs immediate upgrading and updating. Why such a disappointing performance? The CEPA had caveat at the very beginning of its effectuation. The CEPA's preferential rate was higher than most favored nation rate, and a low concession rate, largely due to a big time left for negotiation. Furthermore, I would like to point out that most important factor would be a lack of enthusiasm on the part of two governments and businessmen from two countries, at least until 2 years ago. To ensure the attainment of the original objective of CEPA, 3 implementations are in order. First, an acceleration of the tariff reduction is very crucial by an early upgrade of the CEPA. Second, two countries wholeheartedly need to look into raising the target trade volume to much higher level with the firm commitment to achieve its goal. Third, we need to increase items on trade concessions. An acceleration of the tariff reduction volume is expected to help achieve not only the trade target level, but also helpful resolve the trade imbalance issue as Indian side indicate. India's CEPA low utilization, as well as Korea's very low utilization of CEPA, is very evident. Why that happened? Some possible causes for this low utilization of CEPA. First, significant tariff lines have been excluded from the tariff concession. Second, for items like raw cotton and many steel products, the Korean most favored nation rate is already 0. For some items, the NFN rate was lower than CEPA's agreed rate. The requirement of 35% of the value addition to achieve rules of origin, plus change in tariff heading, is very difficult for the exporters, traders to comply with. It is well known that Korea's business structure is characterized by an acute dichotomy between export-oriented large conglomerate and domestic market-oriented small and medium enterprises, which provide 88% of the Korea's total employment. So the Korean government is very concerned about how to make a robust growth of small and medium enterprises. The same is also true for India. There exist ample areas for two countries to increase SME collaborations to take the advantage of increasingly prevailing B2B and B2C trend. Two countries now need to wholeheartedly look into raising the trade target, shifting, say, 18 billion to maybe $40 billion within next 2 or 3 years. For the rules of origin, the level of local content ratio should be a minimum of 35%. There should be a tariff subheading change. So we need to flexible more on this. On the foreign direct investment side, the CEPA would induce more actively FDI by allowing the opening of various service sectors, including telecommunications, construction, retails, etc. India's cumulative FDI inflows in the past 8 years from Korea recorded only $2.3 billion, which is very sharply contrasted with Japan's $26 billion. Just about 10% of Japan's FDI inflows into India. About 88% of the all Korean subsidiaries established in India are wholly owned. About 11% of Korean subsidiaries are joint ventures between Korean companies themselves. Therefore, joint venture with Indian companies are very rare. I think the joint ventures between Korea and the Indian companies a huge potential area in the fourth industrial revolution. It is a good thing Prime Minister Modi's visit to Korea for two countries to strengthen mutual collaborations on energy, electronics, shipbuilding industries, and to set up a joint working group for cooperation. Korea plus a single window in India to address all these issues for the Korean companies are welcome sign. For Make in India to be truly successful, for Korea's high-tech companies need to operate in India. Korea's Moon Jae-in government has adopted a new southern policy to increase economic and diplomatic connectivity and linkages, especially with India and ASEAN. Given the borderless nature of the fourth industrial revolution, geographical distance is no longer an issue. Two countries can move closer to reap the great potential of the fourth industrial revolution. As Prime Minister Modi indicated, Korea is a powerhouse of ICT hardware, and India is front runner in software development in ICT. By working out active collaborations to combine the mutual strengths, two countries can boost venture startups in a variety of areas such as healthcare, defense industry, renewable energy, and smart city development. I was very much impressed while looking at what's going on in Bengaluru. I'm also very much impressed what is going on the various venture startups in the Pangyo Venture Complex in Korea. These collaborations, Bengaluru type and the Pangyo Venture Complex, would produce a very formidable result. The post-CEPA joint meetings are really crucial to simplify the visa issuance and multi-entry visa category. And also we need to work on co-production of the broadcast programs, movies, animated cartoons. Korea also would like to call for a further opening of Korean banks into India. These things need to be urgently implemented. Finally, Korea-India should fully commit to realize the inherent potentials of collaborations. For this purpose, Korea and India need to reduce four distances still existing between two countries. Those four distances have economic, cultural, administrative, geographical dimensions. Economic distances between two countries related to the development legacies, such as import substitution, inward-looking versus outward-looking development as Korea adopted. Cultural distance is related to Confucius ethics and perhaps Hinduism. Administrative distance is rooted on the government interventionism and complex bureaucratic rigidity. Geographical distance can be clearly mitigated by increasing a physical connectivity. Ladies and gentlemen, for example, the number of air flights during November last year between India and Korea were only 162 flights, whereas the flight between China and Korea recorded 8,374. Tremendous difference. Air passengers between China and Korea recorded in the 1 month, November last year, recorded 1 million plus. But between between India and Korea, only 27,400 people. Absolutely no comparison in terms of the connectivity between Korea and China, between Korea and India. Two countries should work hard to close the gap, the distance gap, with great enthusiasm and priority. The business summit like this is highly likely to contribute to reduce for distances between two countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chung Yung. May I now invite Ambassador Dr. V.S. Sheshadri, former Vice Chairman, Research and Information Systems from developing countries, to share his learnings from Indo-Korea CEPA.
Honorable Minister, the Commerce Secretary, and distinguished panelists, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this business summit. Some time back, under the aegis of a think tank, RIS, I had done a study on the implementation of CEPA after 5 years after it came into force. So I will be very happy to share some of the results with you. Mr. Sanjay Chadda has already laid the context, so I will not go into those in too many details. I will stick to pointing a few specific aspects in respect relating to trade in goods and services. But two things need to be recognized: that there is a change backdrop since 2010 when the agreement came into force. One is the general sluggishness in world trade that started after 2011, and also it went to some decline in 2015-16. But even providing for that, what is of concern is that the share of India's exports to Korea in India's global exports has dropped from over 2% before CEPA came into force to 1.45%. On the other hand, Korea has done somewhat better, and the bilateral trade deficit is wider, and Korea's share in India's global imports has climbed from 2.8% to 3.8%. Now, the third point, which I would like to briefly mention, since 2010, the two countries have also concluded more FTAs. India has concluded FTAs with Japan and Malaysia, whereas Korea has concluded FTAs with 10 more countries, and that cover over 70% of its trade now. In fact, the impact of Korea's recent FTAs in 2015 with China and Vietnam, two of Korea's large trade partners, would also begin to have significant impact on India's exports to Korea. Now, turning now to specifics, products which have benefited from CEPA tariff concessions as far as India is concerned include aluminum ingots. Our exports of them rose from $100 million in 2009-10 to over $700 million in 2016-17. Certain oil meals like rapeseed and cottonseed extract, a few engineering products like regulators, piezoelectric crystals, certain pharma items like antibiotics, cotton fabrics, polyester yarn, hides and skins, lead, and certain chemicals. But there have also been certain products whose exports have been affected more by domestic supply constraints or price factors than tariff concessions. These include items like primary iron and steel products, iron ore, soya bean meal, etc. Another aspect to note is the high benchmark, the rule of origin was mentioned, for cut and polished diamonds, which is an important export item in India's export basket. It is 35%. The value addition in cutting and polishing diamonds works out to only 15 to 20%. There is a constraint along with a high level of luxury tax imposed by Korea of 26%, which has greatly limited trade in this sector. Yet another issue is the absence of quick SPS clearance for many of our agricultural products, or not our certification of organic products not being agreed to by Korean authorities for automatic approval. Now, there are also certain items where a higher level of tariff concession under CEPA could have helped. As a specific example, I may mention the case of frozen shrimps, where India's exports to Korea are minimal, about US $8 million annually, because of the zero tariff rate quota for us, as against 5,000 tons each to ASEAN countries under the Korea-ASEAN FTA. Now, that MFN tariff being 20%, it makes exports of frozen shrimps to Korea totally uncompetitive. On the other hand, India is one of the top exporters of shrimps to Japan, as India gets concessional duty under the CEPA with Japan. Some labor-intensive items like garments or footwear from India were expected to benefit from tariff concessions in CEPA, but did not really do so. And also the significant shares that you see of engineering items or pharma items in India's exports to US. This was brought out in one of the slides in Mr. Chadda's presentation. So the significant share that these items have in India's exports to more developed markets, EU and US, you don't see to the same extent vis-a-vis Korea, despite tariff concessions. One has to then look beyond tariffs in terms of penetrating into Korea's distribution and retail chains and their dynamics. The presence of many Korean business leaders today can perhaps help fill this gap. How can Indian engineering products enter into supply chain collaboration with China, with Korea, could be one of the key points to further discuss. On imports from Korea, electrical and electronic items, machinery items, and steel, three set of products account for 45% of Korea's exports, have generally done well for Korea compared to 2010. Imports in them have been driven to some extent by their invested enterprises in India. In certain cases, like ITA-1 products, of course, CEPA has had no role. But in respect of others like steel, the CEPA concessions have certainly contributed to the rise. Import of chemicals, plastics, rubber articles have more than doubled during the 5-year period, many of them due to CEPA concessions. Of course, for certain of them, the increases have happened even as they are under excluded or sensitive categories. There have also been certain anomalies, such as high-value imports of unwrought silver and some gold items, perhaps because of the CEPA concession. So it's a mixed bag, and I would refer you to the study under RIS that has been conducted for further details. On the services trade again, it is Korea which is the surplus, as per figures available, and transport services are its strength. Some of the large Korean groups have also set up their own research and development centers in India, but the extent to which these are contributing to the export of IT and other computer-related services from India to Korea in the form of Mode 1 is unclear. We need more statistical information. Also, Korean investments in the services sector in India include setting up a children's dental center, another group having a TV shopping and mobile shopping outfit, a Korean online gaming company in Chennai, etc. This is apart from the access it has developed in financial services and asset management. Some investments are also in the construction, real estate, and logistics sectors. On the Indian side, while some Indian IT majors have their offices in Seoul, they have not been able to secure much local business. It would be important to correct this situation. The joint study group preceding CEPA had underlined that complementarity in the form of strengths in hardware and manufacturing by Korea and strengths in IT and software by India could form a good basis for collaboration between Indian IT companies and Korean manufacturing companies. I would venture to suggest that offering Indian companies some opportunities in government procurement in Korea can be a way of giving them greater exposure and local awareness about their skills, particularly among SMEs in Korea. Secondly, While more Indians are now working in Korea with Korean companies or universities, it is far from clear what have been the benefit from the special provision in CEPA for 163 categories of professionals who can provide for temporary services as contractual service suppliers or individual professionals. Can mechanisms be put into place for its better monitoring? Also, the requirement by Korea on local presence under Mode 1 for a whole range of services, including architectural services, engineering services, and advertising services, seems a limitation. There is also no commitment from the Korean side in CEPA on health services. There is also a separate chapter, and this is very important to understand, on bilateral cooperation, specifically identifying 13 areas in the CEPA. This is chapter 13, and the areas include textile and leather, ICT, pharmaceuticals, and trade and investment. I consider that it will be in mutual interest for its very active implementation. Enhancing India's trade capacity and building linkages with Korean retail and other distribution chains are necessary. For example, pilot projects of feasibility studies for greater investments in textile or footwear projects from Korea, or for promoting closer collaboration on generic drugs, or in setting up food processing and shrimp processing units in India that can also cater to the Korean and other East Asian markets could be some of the possibilities. The business summit, with separate high-level sectoral sessions later today, seems ideally placed to work out such collaborative efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Seshadri. I would now like to request Dr. Park Jin, President, Asia Future Institute, to give his remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jin Park. I'm a former politician in Korea, but now I'm teaching at a university and running my think tank called Asia Future Institute. I'd like to congratulate the host of this gathering, 조선일보 and CII and KOTRA, and all the other people who have made this possible. This is my first visit to India, and every time I visit this country, I'm very much impressed with the huge potential for development and also determination for country to go forward. And also our diplomacy, I think, is the good hands. We have a good ambassador, distinguished Ambassador Vikram Doreswamy in Korea, and the new ambassador here, Ambassador Shin Bong-gil, who just arrived in Delhi, is one of our best distinguished diplomats. So I think we are very confident and we can promote and develop our cooperation in the future. Before I talk about the future, let me just touch upon about the past, what happened in the past. As I mentioned, this is my first visit. My first visit was in 1906 February, when the President Kim Yong-sam visited India as the first Korean president to visit this country. Business-wise, that visit has made it possible that the Korean companies can invest into India with 100% foreign direct investment. The Samsung, Hyundai, Lotte, and Tucson have all benefited from this new arrangement. My second visit was in 2009, August. If you can remember, there was a time when we signed the Korea-India CEPA. That time, I was the chairman of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Unification Committee of the Korean Parliament. I had a chance to meet with the leaders in the Indian government, including the Minister Anand Sharma, the Speaker Meera Kumar, and the Minister Shashi Tharoor. And we discussed the impact of this CEPA agreement on both countries, economically, politically, diplomatically, and strategically. I also had an opportunity to visit the Indian Nuclear Energy Research Institute, BARC, B-A-R-K, and ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, and also Bangalore. I was confident and I believe that this CEPA was the right thing for the two countries. The win-win arrangement is not just trade and investment or the selling of merchandise, but it is a great strategic foundation upon which both countries can move forward. So on return, in my own committee, we deliberated on the CEPA, and then we passed it so that the National Assembly can ratify the CEPA in the main session. At that time, I had three main expectations in my committee. As was explained in the previous presentation, it was the first Korean FTA with a BRICS country, India. For India, it was the first FTA with an OECD country, Korea. Two, it's a mutually beneficial and complementary relationship. India and Korea can benefit from this intense interaction on the economic front between the two countries. And three, Korea can diversify its trade relationship beyond US, China, and Japan. So in a world, the strategic choice for South Korea and India was the right thing. And I think that in hindsight, we made a great decision. I think CEPA is on the right track, and the sense of direction that we had at the time of this conclusion of CEPA, I think is absolutely right. Now we have the new relationship between two countries, which we describe as a special strategic partnership. 3 years ago, in May 2015, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Seoul, Korea. And it was, in a way, a milestone in upgrading the relationship to a strategic dimension. The importance of CEPA has become even greater now because the world has changed during the 8 years after the conclusion. First, the importance of the emerging market has become even more pronounced. The countries like India, Brazil, Russia, and China obviously are on the rise. Second, Korea and India need each other much more than before. Korea is now the 6th largest global exporter and one of the 10th largest economy in the world. And we need a new market and a new partner, above all in Asia, based on Korean capital, technology, and manufacturing industry, so that we can produce more sustainable business opportunities and create a synergy. Therefore, India is a perfect choice, a natural partner, as a new frontier for the Korean economy. India has a huge potential for consistent economic growth. We know the World Bank has predicted that this year India will achieve 7.8%, 7.3%, which is phenomenal. And in tandem with the continuous growth of the Indian middle income class, India has a huge workforce and has a consumer market. It has a greater number of young people with an average age of 29, more than any other country in the world. India has a strong basis for science and technology. I mentioned BARC and ISRO, advanced R&D, and space and nuclear technology. And that absolutely provides a greater opportunities for Korea to enter into a deeper synergy and cooperation. So it is no wonder that the two countries is taking each other more seriously now. For Korea, in terms of the new Southern policy, and for India in terms of Act East, under President Moon Jae-in and also Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We have had a presentation about the problems and impediments of the CEPA agreement in hindsight, such as the trade imbalance. Korea is running trade surplus with India, which is growing. And two, less utilization of CEPA for the benefit of two economies, and also gap in expectations. But I think that these problems are not insurmountable. We can overcome these impediments through our negotiated amendment to change the structure of our mutual trade. So we can redress trade imbalance, we can enhance investment on both sides, and also we can promote the service sector through our frank discussion and also exchange of our information. In that sense, the current negotiation between two countries should be expedited so that we can come to a conclusion in the near future. My final point is that the CEPA agreement is not just an economic benefit for two countries, but it also has an important strategic dimension. We should make this special strategic partnership really special. We have compelling reasons to do so. First, the world economy is faced with a growing challenge of protectionism, such as the America First impact of America First policy. For example, Korea and India are now faced with the impact or the possible protective tariffs made by the United States on the steels that we export to the U.S. market. I think two countries, Korea and India, should cooperate to avoid these unfair trade practices and to strengthen free trade in the Asia-Pacific region as like-minded partners and sharing visions and values. Second, Korea and India need to deal together with the growing influence of China in the economic and geopolitical sense in the region. South Korea, as you know, has been recently been subject to economic retaliation by China because of the THAAD missile deployment carried out to defend the country from the growing threat of North Korean nuclear and missiles development. This has in fact stimulated Korea's active interest in approaching ASEAN and India as a closer economic and strategic partners for peace and stability in the region. India, I guess, also has strategic reasons to be concerned about China's economic expansion and power projections in the Indian Ocean and beyond. The Indo-Pacific strategy envisioning the free and open Indo-Pacific and shared by the US, Japan, and Australia, as well as India, has substantial strategic relevance for Korea, which is an ally of the United States and strategic partners of Japan and Australia. We are common members of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in East Asia, but I think that India should join the APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Community, so that we can have wider and deeper partnership in the region. This leads to the need for enhanced cooperation between Korea and India in the areas of defense industry, aerospace technology, and nuclear power generations. With the improved CEPA agreement, which is now being negotiated, Korea and India will be able to introduce a new golden era of genuine partnership, which is both special and strategic in the real sense of the world. Finally, I would like to emphasize the importance of cultural partnership between the two countries. And I know that the Korean culture is now being increasingly known in India, and same is the case with the Indian culture in Korea through the Bollywood movies. The names like Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, Priyanka Chopra, Deepika Padukone are well-known names in Korea. I think this is about the time that we should produce a joint movie with actors and actresses from both countries to describe the important historic relationship like the Princess of Ayodhya to the kingdom of Kim Hae, and also maybe about the Korean War, so that both people of both countries can understand each other and also benefit from that historical context of our real partnership. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made a point that democracy and demography and demand make India a unique country that can be very successful. I would like to add another point, which is determination. And I think that Korea and India share determination to excel and to survive and prosper. So if Japan can do it, I can assure you Korea can do it faster and cheaper. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's my privilege now to invite Madam Rita Theotius, Secretary, Department of Commerce, Government of India, to deliver her address.
Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, Mr. C.R. Chaudhary, Dr. Park Jin, Ambassador Sheshadri, Dr. Chung Yong, Mr. Nishat Parikh, Mr. Sanjay Chandra, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to you. It is appropriate that our first plenary session has focused on the main instrumentality we have to strengthen our partnership. As has already been said, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Republic of Korea was India's second comprehensive economic agreement and the first with an OECD country. We signed it in the context of what has been said by previous speakers of the immense potential that exists between our two economies to harness our complementarities. We covered goods, investment, services, bilateral cooperation, and the areas we focused in cooperation was including those mentioned by Dr. Sheshadri: customs, audiovisual co-production, competition, new and renewable energy. So where do we stand? Sanjay has already brought out the trend of the numbers. Our trade has certainly grown from 12 billion in 2010 to about 20 billion today in the calendar year 2017. But the fact is that the growth of trade has decelerated. And the trade deficit of India with South Korea has widened. Today at $11.4 billion, it is certainly not a sustainable position. And this widening trade deficit has aroused concerns in many quarters that, and for a long-term sustainability, we will need to work towards a mutually beneficial and a more balanced trade. We have now completed 8 years of the India-Korea CEPA. The preferential tariffs, which were in the progressive elimination categories for the 5th year or the 8th year schedule, have now become fully operational. As a result, about 70% of the tariff lines in India's schedule and 88% of the lines in Korea's tariff schedule are already at zero duty under the CEPA. Despite these concessions having come into place, the question is, why is it not being utilized to the extent possible? We need to work together to identify and address these impediments and increase the utilization rate of the CEPA so that industry on both sides can gain from the concessions that we have given to each other. Some of the complementarities we envisaged have not even been harnessed so far. For example, the cooperation in food processing through joint ventures, the capacity building in manufacturing and expansion of the services trade are nowhere near the actual potential. South Korea's proficiency in hardware manufacturing and India's prowess in software were considered to be complementarities which would receive a natural boost through CEPA. but we have not seen significant strides in partnerships between Indian and Korean companies. We had envisaged mutual recognition agreements in professional services such as nursing, healthcare, accountancy, English language, and we have not achieved progress in these directions. So this is important for us to note that yes, there is a great deal that we shared and what we envisaged, but there are areas of concrete work that we had identified which still need to get addressed. In terms of investment, and I would like to mention to the previous speakers and remind you of what our Prime Minister said. 90% of India's sectors are already open for foreign direct investment on the automatic route. Another 7% are available through the government approval route. And telecom, IT, banking, they're already on the automatic foreign direct investment route. We initiated the review of our CEPA, the upgradation of our CEPA in 2016. I think we have done adequate level of diagnosis in this session. And I think that we have done several rounds of discussion. It is now time to realize the outcomes of these discussions. I welcome the observation of the Honorable Minister Park Eun-gu and our Minister Suresh Prabhu that we are committed to an early conclusion of the review on which we have been working since 2016, and I hope that we can address it in the very short future. As part of the efforts to augment our strategic relationship, we are working to establish a future strategy group under which joint projects will be taken up in the areas of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, future manufacturing, robotics, clean technologies, and so on. The objective of this partnership is a common goal of spearheading together the coming era of the fourth industrial revolution. We meet India and Korea, as always, two forward-looking and business-minded democratic countries with the good fortune of having substantial complementarity and opportunities in each other's economies. Together, we can work to ensure balanced and significant benefits to both economies, and I think that truly is the commitment to which we need to dedicate ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd now like to request the Honorable Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, Mr. C.R. Chaudhary, to welcome everyone.
Respected Madam Rita Teotia ji, then dignitaries sitting on the dais, and all the learned delegates from Korea, ladies and gentlemen, friends from delegates also from the India, friends from media. In fact, I wanted to say something, but Honorable Arun Jaitley ji has already come over here. The third session was to be started at 12. And he is the busiest man, and we cannot take much more time. But I would like to request, first of all, I would like to welcome all the delegates who have come from Korea to attend this second edition of the Indo-Korea Business Summit. Honorable Prime Minister rightly told that we have the very long economic, commercial, social relation. And through this CEPA, after 1st January 2010, this CEPA was implemented. And through this CEPA, a lot of relaxations have come in the business sector. And we, in 2002, we are having only business was very low. The trade was very low, but it improved up to 2016 and 17 because of this CEPA. Honorable Prime Minister rightly told there are a lot of opportunities for Korea to invest in India because a lot of relaxation, many relaxations, regulations, simplify all the procedures and everything has been done for the foreign direct investment, and Korea can also avail those opportunities. One thing I would like to say in this union budget of 2018-19, a new scheme was announced, that is the Ayushman, under which 10 crore people of this nation who are in a vulnerable or a BPL families and mediocre families will be benefited by this scheme. This scheme is not to the benefit only to the poor beneficiaries, but it will need a great infrastructure also in the health sector. A lot of hospitals will come up. So there is another sector where Korean expertise, Korean industrialists can participate in this also. Secondly, infrastructure. Trillion of rupees, trillion of US dollar will be spent in the near future on the connectivity and infrastructure. That is even railways, in the civil aviation, shipping, building, and all these this connectivity and these infrastructure sites are open. So domestic as well as the foreign direct investment can be done. But one thing in the last, there I think the Koreans should also avail the good opportunities. They should also have the benefit of our software engineering. We have the expertise by joint venture. The Korea and India can do a lot in the world. So these are the things. These are the areas where we can invest, where foreign direct investment will be most welcomed, and we are cereals, fodders, and pharmaceutical sector, chemical sector, and iron and steel sectors. Korea can get the benefit from these things also from India. At present, the trade balance is not in the favor of India, but I hope both the countries will jointly do invest in some companies will invest jointly so that they can have the win-win position in the global scenario. In the last, I would like to thank everyone who have come to attend this summit, in the Indian business icons and delegates from the Korea. And the last, I would like to thank the CIA and all the partners who have also helped in organizing this business meet. Thanks to all. Thank you very much.
We thank the Honorable Minister, Secretary, and all our other speakers today for this session. The Honorable Finance Minister has arrived. Please remain in your seats. We're going to straight away go into the next session. A group photograph is to be taken of this session. May I request all of you to please stand for the group photograph before you leave the dais for the Honorable Finance Minister.